It was my birthday yesterday, Tuesday's child, full of grace. Born the 14th of November, 1874, in the top room above the house in Stepney. Now, I'm 47. I've lost the grace. Yeah, that's for sure. It could be worse. I could be back in Mons in some filthy trench with a rat's licking my arse. Or in the barracks in Stepney with Mona shrieking at the desk sergeant about her useless husband and her with 2 children to feed. Life never works out how you want. I like it here in Ireland. It calmed me after the nightmare in France, put a dent in my temper. I always had a temper. It's like a sudden red mist overwhelms me. Inherited, I'm told, from my daft father. I joined up for the money. With the Great War over, there was nothing for the likes of me. A demobbed squaddy from the Poplar and Stepney Rifles. Apart from killing Germans, I had no skills. And those were bad times. Mona giving me hell. Her father glowering at me from the old armchair by the stove. The kids crying non-stop. I hit her. Once. Well, maybe twice. It was the constant whinging I couldn't stand. And Henry Bishop told me about a recruitment drive for demobbed soldiers to help with the RIC deal with the rebellion in Ireland. There's good wages, bit of travel, maybe an RIC pension at the end of it. I leapt at the chance. We had 3 months training in a disused Royal Flying Corps camp up in Gormanstown. I took to the policing, the watching, the stalking, identifying the hidden enemy. And then me and Henry were posted to the RIC barracks in Temple Moor. And the locals call us black and tans on account of the uniform. Dark green RIC jacket, khaki trousers. I think they're very smart. Baby likes the uniform. Oh, Jesus, what have I done? We're reserve police constables, which is better than what I was. A mud-spattered corporal, pissing his pants with fear from one filthy trench to the other. A reserve constable, an aid to the civil power. I go to Mass in the cathedral in Thurles. Well, it's safer there. People don't recognise me. I cycle over from Templemore, always in civvies. Father Maher, the parish priest, knows who I am now. There's always a few RIC lads in for the early Mass. I've even seen the district inspector. You don't know the enemy, though. It's not like in the trenches. Here, they're like us, hidden in plain sight. 2 Sundays ago, Father Mick warned people from the pulpit not to react to the martial law measures. Sit tight, he told them. Obey the law. Keep your heads down. You could feel the tension in the church. I spotted several troublemakers that Sunday, in their best suits, hands joined, murder in their hearts. Tom Malothney, for example. Mixie Connell owns a pub on the square. Tom Dreaper works in Maloney's too. A dark lad who was on the streets during the rising in Dublin. When I was cycling back to Templemore last Sunday, I spotted him on the bridge. He was talking to the Church of Ireland rector, Reverend Woodburn. That's an odd connection. The local RIC have their eye on Draper. He's a trade union man, labour agitator. Bad eggs, all of them. It's the girls we like, though, Henry and me. I was too sick and miserable to even notice the French women. Here it's different. I met Baby last March in Quinlan's pub in Moyne. It's a safe village, big cattle farmers who did well out of the Great War. She was selling fresh eggs to Bill in the shop end of the bar. I noticed her straight away. I was in civvies, keeping an eye, watching. I followed her out. It was a wet, dull evening. Everyone was in Thurles at confessions. Now, she was on for it. You can always tell. She liked a risk. A black and tan, a reserve constable. She hadn't been with anyone. Living out there on the Garran Row Road at the end of the long lane, miles from anywhere, minding her old father and his crack brother, her Uncle Matty. I don't think they even noticed me. You couldn't be entirely sure, though. Once or twice I said rosary with them. Old Matty, gabbling out the mysteries and the trimmings, the four of us hunched over the Sugorn chairs in the half-light. I mean, they must have noticed the English accent, but no one ever commented on it. And then she broke it off with no warning. I mean, it wasn't safe. Things were getting dangerous. The Ryan girls in Thurles had their hair cut with a shears. Worse things had been done. Quiet evening, early July. I couldn't bear it. I'd made a new life for myself here. I was someone, a reserve constable, a new life. I had money, status. I knew these people. This was not supposed to happen. I don't know you, she told me. You'll never know me. You sell eggs to a fucking publican, I told her. You're nobody. Your mad father and your uncle living in a thatched cottage down the lane. I'm a soldier of the Crown, a reserve constable. And she looked away. Gravel crunching under her bicycle. You're not even any good for sex, I shouted. I have dozens like you. The stone hit her bang on at the back of her head. She turned. Henry Bishop advised me to keep my mouth shut. You reported the death, but there's doubt about how she died. She could have fallen off the bike. Leave it at that. He told me they'd ship me back to Dublin Castle for discharge. I'd be let back to London. All I had to do was stay quiet. I was well regarded by the RIC Special Unit in Templemore for my reports on the known Republican activists. No one knew about me and baby. Herself, her father, mad uncle, were not on any RIC list. I had a good record. I'd served in the Great War. There was no evidence. I'd called in baby's death, cycled up to the station in Thurles and reported a dead female with a severe head wound out there on the Garran Row Road, close by Moynes village. Nobody asked me what I was doing out there in that remote spot. There were other priorities than unknown plain country women banging their heads. My eyes were full of the dead, the pale, battered faces of Germans, countless and unknown, and the familiar faces of our lads, discarded, bloated in the rain and the mud. Baby's just one more face, lying there amongst the summer thistles and the dust, and the bicycle wheel spinning. And 4 days later, on the 11th of July, the truce was announced.
The day the Tens came looking for them, they couldn't be found. They took their father instead. They dragged him out of the house, terrified. I ran to him, but they stopped me, and the screaming children that clung to my skirts. Revenge, that's what it was all about. As if that wasn't enough, they broke the place up as they left. Crockery, furniture, some Lutherman firing at the hens. I was sure he'd be shot. They held him for nearly a week. When I saw him come in the door, safe and sound, he was filthy. His eyes were deep in his head. He hadn't slept for days. He threw himself on the stool and held his head in his hands. There was nothing of him left. Milk the cows, sow potatoes, and all the other work that has to be done around the farm. All the housework too. We nearly starved when the co-op in Upper Church was destroyed because there was no place to sell anything. If they keep up the fighting, it will affect prices, and the new calves will be worth nothing. I obliged the boys to stay home and made sure they were busy working around the place with the cattle. They complained, but it had to be done, and their father isn't right in himself and won't be. We all thought that the truce would be the final saving of us. We didn't expect the IRA to be still recruiting new members and training volunteers while the talking with the British was going on over in London. I asked Pat to tell me if there is a treaty. Will that mean it will all stop? He couldn't tell me. When I asked Sean, he just growled at me and said he would fight to the bitter end. What if you're killed? I asked. They gave me no answer. I have to try and imagine what a new Ireland will be like. If they don't accept it, will the fighting go on and on forever? I'm so relieved my daughter Dolly is out of the place. The IRA cut the hair off the two Ryan girls. They were seen drinking with an English soldier. Dolly has a good position with a solicitor in Dublin and a room in a house in Drumcondra. I remind her to be always watchful when she goes out for her walks, which she does every day. I don't trust her not to chat to young men she might meet. She's a pretty girl, my Dolly, and if things are anything like here, then she could be in big trouble and lose her position in a moment if anybody talks about her. She earns good money, and every week manages to send me something, which means a lot to me, the way things are at the moment. I'd love to see her if she could come home, but I've told her not to come. Everything is so unsettled. I try to hear what's been happening in London and the people who are talking with the British. I know the names of Michael Collins and Arthur Griffith and others. There does be a crowd outside Shanahan's in Thurles, waiting for the latest papers and talking about it. I hope when it's all settled in the end that Sean will see his way through and find some good in it. I'm sure Pat will agree as well. They must give it a chance, or else it will be war again. I dread the thought of that. Sean has no brains at all, but maybe Pat will persuade him to see sense. They always went out that door together. Please God they'll come home together. Us women are left behind to keep everything going. We spend our time on our knees, praying to the Lord to help us.
We have lived through turbulent times, and if my faith in God is constant, my faith in humanity has been severely undermined by the events of the past few years. There are wild rumours everywhere, but I take comfort from the King's address to the Ulster Parliament, in which he expressed a great eagerness for things to be settled peacefully, whatever way things land. The Archbishop has no sympathy with the recent fighting. He always believed in constitutional agitation, and that alone. Up until the truce, we had to endure the imposition of martial law, a great hindrance for the ordinary people, but which was deemed necessary in order to curtail the activities of the rebels. I preached at the cathedral and warned the people to observe the restrictions as the easiest way of avoiding difficulties. As I began my remarks, you could notice that everyone held their breath. They understood, as did I, that the district inspector was under the pulpit listening very attentively. The regulations were there in order to prevent the speedy messaging between different centres of Sinn Féin. But martial law did not weigh heavily on the people. They affected the wealthy class more than the general population. After Mass, Joe Mallochny, the captain of the Thurles Hurlers and a shop assistant at Maloney's Drapers, said to me that they were all very busy harvesting the potato crop, and they were far too busy for rebellion around his neighbourhood. He assured me that there were no fools about Douala. He also said, moreover, that I should know that Mr. McCann, who was blowing about leading an army, was the grandson of a landlord who always extracted the last shilling and who never failed to evict when rent was not forthcoming. It was unlikely even his own labourers would join the colours if he started a revolt. A magistrate near Cashel was to be killed on account of sentencing some Dundrum Sinn Féiners a short time before. It was said that he was sure to go down, but the same thing had been said about him 25 years before when he was a sub-agent to Mr. Butler. I saw him on Thurles on the day he was to be shot, and he gave anyone who wished to open fire on him ample opportunity for doing so. Because of the restrictions, I had to get a permit for my motor bicycle to go to Dundrum to hear the nuns' confessions. A very great effort for small reward, you might say. As I approached Canulty Barracks, I was amused to observe how the police received me. I sounded my horn as I came near them and saw a policeman, armed with rifle prepared, standing on the road before me. The sergeant stepped out as I slowed down to avoid being shot. The folly of him asking me my business when I see him at Mass and Communion every week. In days past, I proclaimed as widely as I could that the insurgents could never be guilty of cold-blooded murder or any such unclean fighting. I laid my views as forcefully as I could before a local Sinn Féiner, and he agreed that it would be a libel on the brave but misguided men who had taken up arms in a good cause to saddle them with such nefarious activities. The last 2 years have put to bed such naivety. Horrific acts on both sides have been an education on how completely the devil can corrupt the human spirit. They have met with approbation on both sides from adherents of Sinn Féin or of unionism, showing how degraded the ideas of all sides are about what is best for our country. I may say that there have been some arrests in Tipperary. Pierce Hennessy and his family have been great friends of mine since boyhood, and I have often advised them to quietly drop out of the movement, but they would not be moved. I was deeply grieved to hear that he had been taken up. The most recent police notice advised citizens of Tipperary that any citizen with his hands in his pocket would of necessity be treated as a threat and would be liable for arrest, or, in case of emergency, at risk of coming under fire. And so, a man with his hands in his pockets would be at risk of being killed. When word of the truce came, it was amusing to watch the groups of people gathering every morning outside Shanahan's shop when the Cork Examiner was expected to arrive. When it did arrive, there was a general scramble. They managed to keep copies for all the regular customers, but the copies sold over the counter were swept away in 5 minutes, and many people had to go away without a paper at all. The Sketch was the only paper with late information about announcements from the House of Commons, and on that account, it was a great boon to us. Let us hope and pray that such jostling and banter is the most turbulent activity that we will see over the next few years, as we endeavour to find a path out of the moral degradation of the last few years.
Dear Mammy, last evening I walked the length of the Royal Canal, from the North Strand to the Binns Bridge and back to the lodgings in Drumcondra. It took me a fair hour and a half. The birds were out, and I saw one glide down to gather water in its beak from the surface. I sat sometimes and watched the barges slough by. The canal is not as beautiful as Lochmore by any stretch, but that's only because Lochmore is home and the call of home is strong. I get out of the house of an evening and walk a good bit, because to sit in the room on a fine August evening is a sin. I'm sure Father Reedy would agree. A mortal sin, he would say, of the most venal kind, in that booming voice. I do miss his sermons. Mass here is different. Although I go every Sunday, it's not the same. Sometimes I fancy to look about the church and chance to see Mamie Ryan dolled up, Tyke Purcell asleep in the pew, or the Nolan twins skittering about in their seats. But that's all it is. A fancy, a memory. The city people are cooler by character and standoffish. I imagine walking up to someone at the end of Mass to chat, but I can't gather the wherewithal to do so. I am somewhat out of place. How is Daddy? I hope his strength is returning soon and that he will be out and about again. He was only defending his home and Sean, by the way. I wonder, has any compensation been provided by the authorities? If you need any help with the writing up about it, I will surely help. I am learning a power here. I have pounds saved and enclosed some money for you. I am training under Mr. Dixon, and he's a good man. He knows the law well, and he guides me away from any silly or wrong thinking. He calls it emotional thoughts that women carry, thoughts that have no bearing in facts or legality. He is not dismissive but firm, and wishes me to do well. He has a daughter the same age as me, and he wants me to do well and be successful in a proxy sort of way. All the talk now is of the end of the hostilities. Word on the street is that there'll be a full united Ireland. Mr. Dixon is on the contrary. He says that the King's visit to Belfast has put wind in the sails of Craig and his crew, and that the result will be a sundering of our island, a north and a south, an Ulster and the rest. Imagine that after all the fighting. Sean would be mortified and never agree to it. But Mr. Dixon says there'll be a full international agreement, and we must abide by it. He worries, though, that there'll be two different legal systems, one in the north and one in the south, and that it will be difficult to manage it all. But manage we must. Wouldn't it be fine to be a solicitor in this new Ireland? Women are allowed practice since the rule changed 2 years ago, and I'll consider this as my time progresses. There are lots of women's issues and things to be dealt with, and I can be part of this change. Issues of safety and issues of property that need a legal framework drawn up to support them and make them work for us. It will be a fine adventure. I will come home soon, perhaps by the end of summer, as I'm told it gets busier here in the autumn, and I expect even more so now that the new changes are afoot. I would love to settle off the train in Thurles, meet you there before we take the road home. Perhaps we could even get tea in Hayes's before we head out. I miss these small things. I expect people see me as a Dublin girl now. The last time I was home, they looked at me with that peculiar look, as though I have notions of myself. I expect they think I am different now that I live in Dublin. We will go for a walk out by the castle. The mushrooms will be out in the coming weeks. We can bring it back and pick some. I can taste them already, with butter and salt in the pan, and chopped parsley over them. I look forward to it. Mammy, Mr. Dixon says I will have to sign all my correspondence from now on as Dolores Hennessy, because Dolly as a name is too common. What a thing! I almost feel like a different person if that's the case. But Mammy, I will always be your Dolly. Say hello to Daddy and the boys when you see them, if they ever stop tom-catting about. Dolly, 4th of August, 1921.
It is somewhat inconceivable that we have come to this juncture. Don't you agree? 10 years ago, we were set upon Home Rule, which would have allowed some sort of orderly progression into nationhood. But events have overtaken us, and now we have a rabble roused by passions of assault and counter-assault, poised to negotiate a form of freedom for the country. There was that time when I saw those volunteers near the copse that skirts the far acres of the church property. Within my rights, I asked a boy to go into town to summon the constabulary. They were slow to come because they feared everything was a trap. Every high hedge hiding a malevolent shadow. Once they engaged, bullets were fired. The outcome was inconclusive, and the creatures scatter into the night. Except a startling message was received of a dead bird nailed to the front of the church door. The message is clear. It is writ large. But who would do such a thing? Shadows appear in the midday sun for me also. I wonder about the servants, Ryan and Mrs. Severn. Usually jovial, they appear so taciturn. One wonders what information leaves this house and is whispered to others. But gossip is a balm to the idle, and in itself of no concern. But the fever that has engulfed the people and this country over the last few months makes all talk dangerous. I should say to you, the situation has been handled monstrously. The burning of the creamery is foolishness of the highest order. Those culpable should hang their heads in shame. One wonders the thought process that looks to maintain order whilst committing wanton destruction on the other. The two diverge, and no accommodation can be reached. I am not a supporter of this cooperative business that these farmers engage in. It smacks to me of communist Russia. And to burn down a creamery and to destroy livelihoods? Well, this collar is the thing, a sign that both identifies me and in some small way protects me. My wife suggested once that I might take it off going through a strange town, but these people are not inclined to harm the clergy. Be it religiosity or superstition, the people have a great faith, and I don't believe any harm would befall me. Harm will, however, happen in more subtle ways. A slow winnowing. One is identified by speech and dress, and indeed the way one carries oneself. A priestly collar is not needed to show difference. And when the Republicans and Home Rulers have it out with each other, they will come to look on us left behind, the vestiges of the old order, and they will ask, "Are you still here? Weren't you asked to go some time ago?" Kentucky, America. My cousins live there. I will send Martha and Elizabeth there. I will speak with Patrick Ryan about the prospect of their passage to America. He is an agent of emigration, and his prevailing interest is in money in any case. If the church was to hear about the rector's wife and daughter decamping to America, there might be general panic, at least a doubt to the longevity of the church in the town, not to mention the country. So I must be discreet and tread carefully. Ryan will keep his mouth shut. It's in his interest to do so. And I will say they are leaving the country for family reasons, at least until the matter of the country is settled. Is this a place for me? Is there a place for a church of this type to remain in a Catholic republic? Will the people show generosity of spirit to others and leave room for other plants and flowers to bloom when the sun comes out again in this new country? I can only think so, and I can pray. I can pray again and come back to that which sustains us in these hard times, when the bodies came back from Belgium and France, and confusion raged these past few months, and the devil strode the land. I can pray to the Lord God, and that whatever may happen, we can live in a country with pride, an open and tolerant place, with all the many types of beliefs and ways of life He has offered us as roads to choose.
It's Tom. He hasn't come home. I know he's probably come to no harm, but I can't keep these notions clear from my head. He isn't settled in himself. He works so hard and he's so particular in his work, and I know he's trained in tailoring, but they have him doing things that are far beneath him. Mr. Maloney was reluctant to give him the job, you see. I went to Phil, who owns the shop, and I told him we were close to the Bowles family, and he agreed to take him on. I told him he'd keep his head down He'd behave himself, and he'd be the finest worker they'd ever seen. He gives his heart and soul to every enterprise he engages with. And Phil said, with a name like Tom Draper, wasn't he born to be in the business? All he ever wanted to do was to prove that even though he was a union man, he could do a solid day's work. When Connolly and Larkin asked him to march, he dropped tools and fought shoulder to shoulder and endured all that followed. He's got a strong heart, strong opinions, strong hands. Maybe he's in Delahunty's with Joe Malachny and Ned Ryan playing a game of 25s or some such. He'll have to help Mother with the milk in the morning. He isn't much of a drinker, thank God, but he loves a game of cards. Well, more for the arguing of it than the winning of it, I think. Broke his heart when they stood back to let Sinn Féin men stand. Not that he isn't a Republican too, but if Labour lost its way, it's all the matter who was running the country. The proclamation was all very well and good, but the same principled men weren't around. Connolly knew what he was talking about, and MacDonagh was a union man. The likes of those that are carrying on now, they don't care about anything but money and religion. They don't care about the working man. We had to get out of the city. Too many people all piled up, no chance of work, and children running wild all over the place, and bosses and gangers picking their favourites and leaving the rest run idle. Mam said there'd be no shame if Tom and I and the children came home. She said that Mr. Bowles was selling the drapery and the new owners would need some help. They'd be short-handed. Mam had looked after Mr. Bowles' children when his wife died, and she thought that it would return the favour. Tom never lived in a farm before. Dad passed away earlier in the year, and Mam is glad of the help. Although I have to show him what to do, and he doesn't enjoy that. The children help out too. It's really good for them. All the space and the fresh country air. Makes me angry the way they want to divide the country up into according to whatever foot they kick with. God forgive me, but I've no time for the priests or the church. Tom says that the priests and the church always take the sides of the kings and the factories. And I've no time for kings or popes and newspaper men who send young men out to war for one side or another. Let them join arms and work and walk together, all creeds and countries. Please God, he comes home soon. It's worn out, he is, I think. He hasn't had a good word to throw to a dog for weeks. In the city we dreamt of a brand new parliament, him having a trade, a new world. And if it's hard for me to stomach being back here, at least it's home for me. For him, it's like he's living someone else's life. If anything was to happen to him, not that he's angry or even bad-tempered. He's great with the children still, the little he sees of them. But he hardly looks at me now. He fell in with the pigs the other evening, and the little one was laughing at him so hard. Between the child laughing and the pigs squealing and the roars of him, we were both nearly crying. The smell of him after. He can't meet my eye. That's a worry. The only time he does that is when he's down on himself and he doesn't want me to see. When people don't know him, they might think he's a spy or he could get lifted by the police. I know it's gone quiet now, but I wouldn't trust them. After the rebellion, the way they were treated, and the things they saw, they were like men coming home from war, shook. The last time, I walked 3 miles into Thurles to find him. I didn't know if I'd have the heart to be knocking on pub doors, but I was so anxious. He was standing on the bridge, looking into the water. There was a clergyman, Protestant priest, talking to him, Mr. Woodburn. They didn't hear me coming. I think he was in a kind of trance, and that kind man who was walking with the dog stopped when he saw him. He just needs to settle. He'll get used to it. The children will grow up and they'll be a great help to him. Won't be so much on him then. I couldn't manage without him. Jesus Christ, I don't know what I'd do.